good.
Nu staat, ja.
No,
Ja.
okay. Your book got translated in 19 languages and will be translated.
Yes,
I just read
yes.
something about it.
The Dutch is the first translation, which
Yes.
I'm very excited about because obviously it's Truce's own language, and
Yes.
so I actually was in Mechelen last night for
Yeah.
an event, and the moderator read a little bit of it aloud,
Yeah.
and that was really very moving for me to hear it read in her language. But yes, but it's coming in 19 languages, and some Hebrew was the first one that sold, but French and Italian and Spanish and then some weird ones like Russian. It's being translated into Russian. So I think it's I really think it's a very universal story. I think it is, I hope, ultimately uplifting. I mean, it's what Truce did in real life and what I try to capture in the novel is just an extraordinary spirit and cleverness and wiliness and sort of, I would say, fearlessness, but very clearly she was afraid in many of the situations she was in, but she did it anyway. And so I think I think we all like to be inspired, and I hope it's an inspiring book. There's an Otto Frank quote that goes something like, it's less important that you learn history lessons than that you learn lessons from history.
Yes.
I studied history at university, so I learned a lot of history lessons.
Yes.
But for me, the way I took history inside of me was mostly by reading novels. I know so much of what I know about the Holocaust from the novels of Elie Wiesel. I know so much of what I know about World War I from Eric Remarque's All Quiet on the Western Front. And I think we can experience novels in a way that's different than experiencing nonfiction because we tend to kind of inhabit the characters and imagine ourselves as the characters, and so that kind of fills you up from the inside in a way that allows you to take the lessons from history and carry them forward into the future, and so that's what I hope the book does. I mean, especially in this time of closing borders and in my own country, we went through that ridiculous Muslim ban, which was Trump tried to pretend was something else, but was clearly a Muslim ban. And I think it's really important to recognize what happens when you turn your back on people who need your help, what happens when you close your borders to people who need refuge. And if you look at what happened in Austria, obviously, you can say, oh, that didn't end well, let's not do that again. And so I hope that readers will embrace that.
History must not continue. That was the most awful part ever. I was shocked when I heard about some things that happened in the Second World War. Right.
And one of the things about the Kindertransport and the period of Vienna, it's all before the war. It's all pretty, one of the things that you take away from it is that if enough people had stood up to Hitler at the time, he wouldn't have become Hitler in the way he did. And so it's really important, it's set before the war, but it's a warning to people of all the things that happened then, that are some of them happening again. Like you take, Hitler's rise to power. I mean, the things he did were he played on people's prejudices against the Jews, much as the world is now turning against Muslims. Some very interesting parallels to the United States now. When Hitler first was being considered, he was considered a joke. And then he became chancellor, and people thought it wasn't going to last. And then, in places like Austria, he was over the border, and certainly couldn't happen in Austria. Vienna was one of the most progressive cities in the world. How could he possibly come here? And so people didn't leave and didn't change and didn't try to stop in a way that maybe would have stopped Hitler. So
shocking to hear that, huh?
It's shocking to hear. And I want to say to everybody now, I want to say, look at what's happening now. Please stand up now. Make sure it doesn't happen again. So
maybe people were afraid. By that time, they were afraid or poor or something else happened.
So by the time Hitler came in, for sure, people were afraid. And people were poor and couldn't leave. There are a lot of reasons that people didn't leave, including that, I mean, before Hitler came in, it was their country, it was their home. Why should they have to leave their home?
Yes, why should you do that?
Right, exactly. So I think that's all important to keep in mind. That's the lesson I think we need to learn from that history is to not let it happen again. Exactly.
I hope it will never happen
again.
So
I hope so as well.
I can see many wars.
Yeah.
And you graduated from law school. You just told me.
I did.
And you become a writer. How did this work out? I mean, are you still a lawyer? Or,
I'm not still a lawyer.
No.
You know what? The way I practice law, I did a kind of law that's called merger and acquisition law. It's very intense. My days typically started pretty early in the morning and rarely ended before 10 or 11 or midnight or even later. I was telling Shores while we were visiting over lunch that I once had a transaction where I stayed up 3 nights in a row. Or I stayed up 2 nights in a row and worked 3 days in a row without any sleep. So I hardly had time to read, much less write. But also I didn't imagine I could write. And so it was only after that conversation with my husband that I told you about that I started thinking, well, maybe I can write. And I will tell you that literature was my weakest subject in school, except for languages. I was terrible at languages. And the way literature was taught when I was growing up, it was what does the bird on the line at the end of chapter 3 mean? And there was a right answer and a wrong answer. And I see now as a writer that's teaching was wrong. That there's not a right answer and a wrong answer to that every book is a cooperation between the reader and the writer. And I write the book, and everybody who reads it, just as every book I read, the writer, I bring to it what I bring to it. My reader brings to it what they bring to it. And so the story's going to be a little different for every person who reads it. And I think that's really important to remember. But so I didn't think I could be a writer, and so I went to law school because I love to write, and it's a very writing intense field. And then I ended up just taking a little class at a university to start to learn how to write, and then I just started writing. And I read, and I took books that I loved, and I literally sometimes cut them apart so that I could put the chapters in piles and see. This is what the author's trying to do in this chapter. This is what the author's trying to do in this chapter. This is the arc of the whole story. And I really studied writing, read books about writing. But mostly I read books and stopped and thought about them and thought about how they worked. And then, so I have very little formal training in writing. But I just kind of wrote my way forward. So.
Do you think you need an education to become a writer? Is it more handy than if you do that?
I think that, in the United States, I don't know what it's like in the Netherlands, but in the United States, getting a degree in writing, it's called a MFA, Masters of, I don't know, but it's if people do study writing, I think what you need to do, I don't think you need a degree in writing. I hope you don't, because I don't have a degree in writing. I only have a law degree. I think you need to be really steeped in the kind of writing that you want to do. I think that's the best way to learn about writing is to read and to think about. I like to read a book, the first time just to read it and absorb the story. And then I like to go back and look at it and see kind of how the writer put it together, where its seams are, how it's made. And I think that's what you need. And I think you also need a deep caring about people. At least for the kind of writing that I do, you need to be able to imagine yourself as other in other lives, as other people doing other things.
Good. What do you expect from this book? I mean, it's got published in the Netherlands, and what do you think how people will respond?
I never have any idea, to be honest. Sometimes it surprises me what people like to read, and surprises me what they don't like to read. There are some, there's an author, a British author who I love. Her name is Jane Gardam, and she's a fabulous writer. She's a British writer. She's not very well known in the United States. There's a writer in the book, Stefan Zweig, who I think, at least if my experience last night was any indication, everybody in Belgium seems to know about him, but almost nobody knows about him in the United States. Why that is, I don't know. People like to read different things. What I hope will come of the book. I hope that Truce will be much better known, as well known as I think she deserves to be. I mean, I think she's a hero on the scale of Schindler's List, or even bigger. I mean, she saved literally thousands of people, not just in the countertransport, but throughout the war. So I hope she'll be better known, and I hope the families of the stories will be better known, and I hope that people will, like I was talking about before, take that lesson from history and think about what it means to live in the world now.
And do you have any advice for beginning writers? I mean, there are many writers who would like to become a writer, and it's very difficult to be one.
Yes. I have a few pieces of advice. One, if you want to write. It is an amazing way to spend your time, to look more closely at the world around you, and to get to know yourself, really. Because I find in writing that writing about other people, that I find out things about myself that I'm not that young, and that all my whole life I haven't known, and that continues to happen. I mean, I've been writing for 2 decades now, or 3 decades now. I've been writing and publishing for 2 decades, and I still learn new things about myself. But the other thing that's really important, other than to read, obviously, is to continue believing in yourself. In your ability to write way after your mother has given up on you. Your mother thinks you should go back to your day job or stop writing or whatever. You're just about there then. You should just keep doing it. Keep believing in yourself, and keep believing you can do it. I don't know what publishing is like in the Netherlands. I'm not as familiar with it.
It's very difficult.
So
many books got published, but not everyone is famous.
Right. Well, even to get a book published in the United States is very difficult. Like except self-publishing, you can do it yourself, and that's a way that you can reach readers. But to be traditionally published by the major publishers in the United States,
it's very difficult.
It's very difficult. It took me 10 years to get my first novel published. But it doesn't mean that you aren't a good writer. It only means that the right person hasn't picked up your book yet. So I do go through a lot of drafts for my writing. I go through hundreds of drafts for a novel. So it's not like I don't sit down and write it and then it's done. I sit down and write it, and then I rewrite it, and I rewrite it, and I rewrite it. And that's really important to remember too, that much of writing happens in the rewriting after you have. Sometimes you can't really see the shape of the story until you have a first draft and know for sure where it's going to end. Sometimes I start a story and I think it's going to end one way, and it ends up ending up a whole another way. But so just do it, and just believe that you can, because I really feel like I feel anyway. I don't know if everybody agrees with me, but I feel like anybody who is steeped in reading and used to what you do in reading is, especially in reading novels anyway, is you imagine yourself in other lives. That's the training for being a writer, to imagine yourself in other lives. So just do it.
And ebooks are becoming famous. Is this book also going to be an ebook, or are you thinking about it?
I know it is going to be ebook here in the Netherlands, and I think everywhere it's going to be. It's a ebook in English for sure, and I think everywhere it's going to be a physical book, obviously. It's going to be what's very big in the United States now, and getting bigger is an audiobook.
Nice.
That it's actually a lovely way to experience a book, because for one thing, you can do it when you're driving or doing housework or whatever. So you can listen. But also for me, it's when I was growing up, my parents read to me, and I have 2 sons who are grown now, but I read to them every night before they went to sleep, and it's a lovely experience to be read to. And so an audiobook is like going back into that, when you were a child and being read to. It's actually quite a beautiful experience if you have a good audio reader, and the reader does make a difference.
Yeah.
So,
And now some personal questions. You're married. You just told me.
Yes.
You have children.
I have 2 children. They are both. My oldest is getting a PhD in economics. He will graduate in May.
Yeah. Your son or?
My son. Oh, I have 2 sons. Oh, yes. No daughters. No. I had the perfect name for a girl, but I never had a girl. And then my younger son is a computer scientist, and he and a couple other people have founded a company, and they're trying to get it up and running. So yeah.
And do they also want to become a writer, or
it's interesting because in the United States everybody says boys don't read, but I will tell you, my boys are huge readers. They both love to read, but they don't imagine themselves writers.
Yeah. What do they think about you as a writer? I mean, their mother is a writer.
They're I think very proud of me.
Yeah.
They remember when my first novel was published, I don't know if they remembered or not, but when my first piece of any sort was published, it was a little column in a running magazine in the United States called Runner's World, and it was a little piece about training for my first and only marathon. But when that piece was published, they wanted to give me something to mark the occasion, and so my husband took them out to get something, and they ended up getting, it's the funniest little thing. It's about this big. It's a little psychedelic armadillo, I will call it. It's a multicolored little bitty armadillo, just a little figurine, and you think, what did that have to do with anything? But every time I look at it, I know exactly what it is, and it reminds me of that feeling of getting that first call. We're gonna, your name's gonna be there. We're gonna publish your piece, your writing. And so they celebrate with me. They're very joyful about it, and they were there all those 10 years I was trying to get a novel published, and was struggling. So they understand what it means to me, and
And are you religious or not?
I am not. I grew up in the Catholic Church.
Okay.
And so I recognize, one of the problems that I had with writing Jewish characters is that my best friends most of my life have been Jewish.
Okay.
So they went to Hebrew school. Are you?
I'm religious.
Okay.
I'm Muslim.
Okay. So I recognize how much of me is formed by the way I was kind of just steeped in religion when I was young. So in ways that I don't even realize myself. And I know that's true for my Jewish friends, because when I was in catechism, they were in Hebrew school, and when I was going to church, they were going to temple, although it was swapped because they were temple Saturday anyway. And so I recognize that that's a big part of me. I am now Episcopalian.
What does that mean?
It's a Protestant religion. It's very like the Catholic religion in terms of, like, when you go to church on Sunday, the Mass is all the same except for about 4 words. But it's a much more open, welcoming religion for women. Which is why, in the Catholic Church, women are not allowed to be priests. And
that's correct.
I always felt, for a long time when I was little, I wanted to be a priest. Until my dad finally said, there are a lot of things you can be when you grow up, but probably not a priest. And I feel that rigidity is not something I want to have. So I believe in God. I respect all religions. Yes. I respect people who don't believe in God. I think
everyone should know it thyself.
Yeah, I think it's much more important what kind of human being you are in the world in this moment.
Yes, and I do think that's very important. Many people think that if you're religious, you're good. doesn't mean that you're good.
Right.
You should be a good person, and then you can be religious, or if you want it.
Right. I will tell you, I don't know in a lot of countries, but I know in the United States there are a lot of people who call themselves Christian, and there is nothing Christian about them.
Yeah.
And so
also in the Netherlands.
Yeah.
I've seen many.
A belief in God does not make you a good person.
No.
And a disbelief in God does not make you a bad person. No. You are who you are. And how you treat other people in the world is, that's my religion, is how I treat other people in the world. So
that's a very good religion. And do you read at all?
I do.
Which genre do you like?
So I read. I read very much the kinds of books I try to write, which are tend to be stories that I would say reveal the human soul, the human condition, reveal who we are as human beings. So a lot of the writers I read are like I would read the Pulitzer Prize winners and Nobel winners. I like to read women authors, especially because I think we don't get women in the United States don't get the recognition that men do even still.
Yeah, you got it as well in the Netherlands. It's very difficult.
Yeah, right. So I love Margaret Atwood. I was, one of the great honors in the United States and Canada was I came out on the same day as Margaret Atwood. I got to meet her a couple of years ago, and she's just an extraordinary.
Is that your favorite author as well?
I don't know if I have a single favorite. I would say if I had to pick a single book, I don't even know if I could do that. If I could have two books, it would probably be Middlemarch by George Eliot. It's a very old, very thick book. And To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, which is an American story set in the American South about primarily about race. And I think I really admire George Eliot because she is the kind of woman I try to write, a woman who wrote before it was respectable to do so. That's why she published as George Eliot. And she writes about the character I most like in that book is Dorothea, who is a woman who is of that time, the 1800s, but wants to make a difference in the world, wants to do something to help people in the world, and is kind of confined to this upper class where women, sit in the drawing room and make polite conversation and play the piano. Not that there's anything wrong with making polite conversation or playing the piano, but she wants to make a difference in people's lives. And so, those are my two favorite books of all time, I guess.
And what are your hobbies next to writing and reading?
Writing is not so much a hobby as a passion and sometimes an obsession. But I like to exercise. I love to read. I spend a lot of time reading. I love to cook. I love to. It sounds funny, but I love to feed people. So I like to host dinner parties and have people over. I like to bring people together who don't know each other, who I think would like each other. So kind of a social matchmaker a little bit.
So you like people.
I do. I like people. And what's interesting because, I spend my days as a writer, you spend your days alone with your imaginary friends, all day long. So I do like to get out and I sometimes I run every morning. I do a little workout, so I stay in shape. I like movies. I like film. I would say I love to ski, but I haven't. Even though I love to ski, I just haven't done it in a number of years now. So I think I used to love to ski and don't do it anymore. And I love to travel. So a lot of my free time is spent thinking about where we're going to go next and where we're going to stay and what we're going to see.
You've been to many places, or?
I have been to fewer places than I would like to be, but I've been to Japan and China and Vietnam and all over Europe and
also to Asia.
To Japan and I haven't been to like India or so there are whole areas of the world that I haven't been yet. I've only been to the
Russia,
I haven't been to Russia. I have 4 nieces and nephews who are from Russia, but I haven't actually been there. I haven't been to the Middle East. I haven't been to Africa except for the very north of Africa, you know, where you can go across from Spain to Africa. So I have many places I want to go. But
which country do you prefer if you would choose one or two?
France.
2 countries?
I love France, and I especially love Paris. So we try to spend, for one thing, I write really well in Paris. And one of the things what I do when I travel is I don't so much necessarily go to museums and that kind of thing. I'll do a little bit of that, but what I like to do is I like to walk around the world I'm in and see what the real lives are like there. I like to wander the neighborhoods and watch people, and if I can understand what they're saying. I think one of the reasons I like France is because although I don't speak it particularly well, I understand the language pretty well, so I can hear the world around me. And then I love Paris. It's my favorite city in the world.
Wow.
If I didn't have family in California, I'd probably be living in Paris now.
Everyone loves it.
So we try to spend a fair amount of time there. So,
And are you writing a new book, or?
I am writing a new book.
What is it about?
It is a similar kind of story.
Okay.
It's set in the south of France in 1940, and it's very much a story of people doing extraordinary things to help people because they need to be helped, as opposed to because it does the person helping any good. So.
Mijn telefoon is vol.